Okay, well, we'll start getting started. Welcome, everyone, to our Dangerous Love Forum number 7. Before we begin, just an important announcement not related to this at all. If you're in Hawaii right now, um, you may have noticed that Hawaii is actually on tsunami watch right now. That means that there's been an earthquake that could have generated a tsunami for Hawaii. They're not sure yet, but they want us to be aware of that and be cautious of that. And so if you're in Hawaii and that's concerning to you and you want to do something and look into that, if you're here live or watching on Facebook, I encourage you just to keep updated with the news and just make sure that you're staying safe with that. But if you're not worried about that, I mean, it's still just in a watch right now. It's not yet to a warning. Um, Otherwise, feel free to stay here. We're still going to have our forum for today. But yeah, just wanted to let people know about that if you hadn't heard yet. All right. So back to Dangerous Love. Today, like I said, we're covering our Dangerous Love Module 7. And so what we're going to talk today about is turning first. So let me share my screen and we'll get started. Okay, so the last few weeks we've been talking about overcoming our fear of conflict and our fear of people, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more today. But today's talking more about what do we do as we've been learning to overcome those things? How do we really put that into action? And so we've finished our first 2 steps, and now we're on step 3 today, which is turning first. And today is actually the only day that we're going to cover this step. But then we're gonna spend the rest of our time together talking about step 4, inviting others to turn. But this is a really critical stage in Dangerous Love because as it's called, it's the turning point for everything that we've been learning and doing. So to start off, if you're watching this, if you want to get out a pen and paper, what I want you to do is to first off just draw out this open and closed. If you can't right now, maybe you don't have pen and paper. I often find myself, because everything's online now, that I don't actually have pen and paper. You can just write on your computer or your phone, make 2 lists. But I want you just to draw this out to create open on one side and closed on the other. And while you're doing that, I'm gonna let some more people in.
Sorry, would you mind to say it again?
Okay. So again, if you're just joining us, all we're doing is we're just drawing out this little diagram, open and closed. So what we're going to do is we're just going to answer some questions and write our answers onto both sides. Oh, well, here's another person. So let me admit them. Okay, so what we're going to want to do to answer the first side is think about a time someone has tried to change you. And this is actually want you to think of a positive example for this one. Think of actually, it could be a teacher, a coach. People are apparently keep getting kicked off because a lot of the people coming in are people that, anyway, sorry. Maybe I should wait longer to start next time. Anyway, what I want you guys to do is think of a positive example of a time someone tried to change you. It could be a teacher or a coach, a parent, a friend, try to teach you something or change the way you're doing something. But it's actually been a good experience for you. They actually helped you learn something beneficial for you.
You want help? Can you
And
get
so
me a
there's a couple
Snickers one
questions.
if I open this for you?
Someone, I'm not sure who, is not on mute. Let me see if I can figure that out. Oh, I think they figured it out. Great. Anyway, sorry. And so there's a couple questions you're going to ask yourself here, thinking about this. What made you open to change? If you think about this person, what qualities did they have? What did they do that made you open to change in the first place? And right now, you're just going to write these down in the open column. And we're going to share them in a little bit. Second question you can ask yourself is what helped you to change? What did they do in the process of you making this change that was actually really helped you be able to do it? And lastly, was there anything they did that inspired you, that actually really helped you feel like this was going to be a really positive change for you to make in your life? So think about these three questions. Think about this positive experience someone is trying to change you, and just write down a few answers, and I'll give you a few minutes for that. Okay, if you're still writing some things down for that, that's okay. You can keep looking at these questions. We're just going to move on to the other side real fast. So write all your answers to that there on the open side. Now think about the same thing. A time someone has tried to change you, but this time think of a negative example. A time where it wasn't helpful, where they were trying to make you do a change that maybe you didn't feel like was necessary, you wanted to do. And what made you close to change? What about this person, the way they approached the situation, made you feel close to the change they were suggesting? Was there anything they did in the process of trying to get you to change that wasn't helpful? Or maybe you were trying to do necessary change, but they made that more difficult than it needed to be. And was there anything they did in that process? This relates to last week. If you were here, we did our conflict tornado. What actually encouraged you to do more of what they didn't like? Or was there anything in that process that they did? So think about another example here. Think about these questions and then write that down on the close side. Okay. If you need some more time, that's totally fine. We're going to actually now talk a little bit about maybe some of the things you wrote down. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to I can't really edit the screen on this the way that they have it set up. So I'm just going to go on to the actual PowerPoint and we're just going to write some things down. So what were some things you wrote down for the open side when you thought of your example for that? Could be an answer to any of those three questions.
Sorry, I'll say something.
Okay.
When they're coming out of a space of love and genuine concern, I think that's how you can be open to change.
Okay, great. Yeah. So when they're coming forth trying to ask you to make that change, and it's from a space of love and genuine concern, great. What are some other things you guys wrote down for the open section?
The people who want you to change see the potential in you.
Okay, great. Thank goodness for spell check. Okay, great. What else?
I don't think it comes out of a place of criticism, TK. It comes out of a place of helping us improve or progress.
Not criticism. Okay, great. Any other thoughts on that?
For me, I was inspired just because I didn't think it would work. And the person who inspired me basically showed me that the other person was important and taught me to try and understand the other person. So it just like basically he showed me the humanity in the situation of the other person and encouraged me to consider the possibility that there could be a resolution.
Okay, great. You used a good word there that encouraged us throughout that whole process. Anyone want to give us one last one for that? I think that's okay. That's a good list. So let's think about the other side of this, the close side. When someone tried to change us and it was a negative experience. What did you guys write down here?
You can tell that they want you to change because they're annoyed with you. And so just like that tone in their voice is just because they're just annoyed.
They're annoyed with you. That's why they want you to change.
Also, they kind of had a preconceived idea of what we were going to say and what our side was, so they wouldn't listen to us. It was just already assumed that they knew our side.
Okay, great. These are great ones. What else?
I would say also it's more about them telling what to do rather than listening to your needs.
All right, great. Well, not great that they do that, but good answer. Anything else? Anyone want to give us our last one here?
For me, it's hard for me to feel like I want to change if the person encouraging me to change hasn't done that change themselves. I don't know how you word that. But
So maybe if they're being hypocritical.
yeah.
Great. And so if they're being hypocritical towards us, they're telling us to do something they're not doing themselves. That can be really difficult to feel motivated to change. And so this is a really good list we have here of a difference of what helps us be open to change and also what can help us be closed to change. Now, if you guys were to sum up maybe in one or two words or a phrase, what we wrote down on the open side, like a way to describe these people who helped us, what would you say it was?
I'd say it was people who show they care about everyone involved are more inclined to make me feel open to it, whereas those who don't seem to care about everyone involved and their needs make me feel more close to it.
Okay, that's great. That's a great way to sum up both these sides that we see, people who seem to have a genuine care and interest in us and everyone else who's involved in the process as well. Those people were open to change because we know it's out of that place of genuine love and concern. But when we don't feel that from them, if we feel that they're annoyed and that's the only reason they want us to change, then we were automatically resistant and closed off to any change that they have. Anyone want to add on to any of that? Okay, great. So that's great ways to conceptualize both these sides, open and closed. So now when we think about this, coming back to conflict for us, and we think about the conflicts that we're in with people, could be family, friends, co-workers, fellow students. We can take it back to we think about the conflicts we have with people. So for us, we know what works, so what inspires us to change. We also know what for us doesn't work and what causes us to be closed to change. The question for us is, which side are we on with those we are in conflict with? Are we on the open side, or are we on the closed side? You don't have to answer that out loud. You can just think about that answer in your head. And if you're like me, hearing that question, I find myself that when I'm in conflict with people, I'm almost always on the closed side. I'm almost always the one who's, thinking that I know what they're going to say. I already know their side. I already know other arguments. So I'm not going to listen. I'm just going to tell them, whatever it is I want them to change, or whatever it is that our argument's about. And, for me, I find myself often on that I see myself on the closed side here. And so if you're like me, maybe you're being able to see that right now. And part of this is being able to turn first, make this most dangerous move, which is what we're talking about today, is being able to make that realization first off of where we are starting from. And as we can make that critical realization, that's going to help us be able to actually make progress in doing something different, because we can understand what we're already engaged in. Now, one way to think about, if we go back to this idea of open and closed, of two people who are closed off to each other and practicing those things that we listed off, is we can imagine two people standing back to back. Now, if you've read Dangerous Love, or maybe you've seen this, because when we normally do these in person, we actually perform this for you, if you will. And so we have two people back to back, and they're elbowing each other. Their backs are right pressed up against each other, and they're turned away from each other. So if we think about that image of these two people standing back to back as a metaphor for two people being close to each other in this destructive conflict, what ways do you think this might represent an I-it relationship?
I think it's that concept of just seeing them or not seeing them. Because, like, once you can see something, even just as a general principle, once you can see something, it's kind of more real to you. And in order to will ourselves to have something not be real to us, we turn away from the possibility. And I think that, like, this is kind of a similar concept here, is if we don't try to see them as something, then we don't have to sit there and justify that they are, like, that they aren't something, or that they are, because it's just like we're basically being ignorant and choosing not to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, great. So when we're turned away from it, we literally can't see each other. And so, one way to think about this is, when we thought about different ways we can think about it as being irrelevant, we ignore them. And so that can definitely be part of it. Or it could just be the holistic idea that we're just not seeing their humanity because we're turned away from them. Our backs are pressed up against each other. We can feel each other, but we can't actually see the humanity that exists in the other person. Great. And so another thing we think about is, how does this relate to a conflict tornado? If you were here last week, or you've learned a little bit about that concept, how do you think this might relate to a conflict tornado? These two people back to back elbowing each other.
Sorry, I talk a lot.
That's okay. I appreciate it.
So I feel like just the visual for me, I'm just thinking of, person on the right, for example, speaking out, and that going around the back of them to the front of the other person, and that person speaking out, and have that, dialogue go around them, around the back of them to the back of the other person, then around to the front. So, like, they have to basically talk around whatever is in the way of their mouths, which in this case is their entire body and whatever else is between that. So I mean, that really is like a circular conversation. And if you don't have any direction other than straight to the person's face and eyes, there's so much between that can cause misinterpretation. And past your mouth is your head and your brain and your preconceived ideas and all those things. So just like from that visual perspective, that's kind of where I see that tornado idea come in.
Okay, great. That's a great way. Yeah, the visual perspective of the tornado, we create this circular process. Great. What else? How do you guys think this might relate to conflict tornado, or this idea of conflict escalation?
I like both the visuals because it gives us more of a like a palpable concept or understanding of the physical motion that we feel when we're pushing back to back against someone. And also conflict tornado just like kind of builds up and creates to something that's worse. So I like having that visual representation to compare to how we both let the conflict escalate and how we're both part of the problem in the conflict.
Yeah, great. Yeah, like we can feel the turbulence, I guess you could say, of it, and we can recognize we're both part of it. One way I like to think about this, and again, there's no right or wrong answer to this. I just want to talk about it. When I like to think about this, if I'm back to back with someone and they elbow me particularly hard, what do you think I'm going to do in response?
Probably elbow back.
Probably just going to elbow them back harder. And it's just the idea that, when we're engaged, we can feel people, we can feel the kind of attacks they're making on us. And if those attacks ever increase, we're probably going to increase it right back. And that's just going to, escalate and blow up this conflict. And so that's one way we might think about how this back-to-back idea represents a conflict tornado. So this is closed. This is a closed relationship. We're going back to open and closed. What do you think it might look like if both these people were open to each other?
I obviously think that they would obviously be talking more and there'd be eye contact, like more positive body language instead of hitting each other.
Great, there'll be more positive body language, there'll be eye contact. And so one way we can just visualize that kind of helps that is they just turn around and they're facing each other now. And so, you think about them standing, their backs are right next to each other. They both take a step forward, turn around. Now they're looking at each other. And so that can be a really simple way of us conceptualizing just them being more open to each other. And just like you said, Morgan, they're going to be making eye contact. There's going to be more conversation. It's going to be less a physical contest and more an actual real human interaction. So as we've gone through this dangerous love process, we've got to this point where, we probably, in the conflicts we have, especially if we've been thinking about a person we're in conflict with throughout this whole time, we want to transform our conflict with them. We don't want to be stuck and destructive in the closed back-to-back setting anymore. We want to be like this, facing each other open, where we see each other's humanity. We see each other as thous, and we can collaborate through whatever the conflict is that we're facing. And so the question for us becomes, how do we move from closed to open? How do we make this change from both being turned back to back to being able to face each other? And there's actually a couple different ways that we're going to talk about that we can make that move. So the first way we're going to call it, we're going to call this way, and the second one we're going to call them easy love approaches. If you remember from our day on self-deception, we made this distinction about how dangerous love exists, but love is a word in the English language. There's only that word, love, that describes it. And so in order to add more nuance and help us better understand this, we're going to add another term into the mix, which we're going to call easy love. And we're going to come back to that right here. And so the easy love approach, or this is the first of the easy love approaches, which is this, is going to be something actually, I think, I don't know who said it before, but they talked about running around and trying to stand in front of the other person. So you can think about that, if we're back to back, maybe one way I think, okay, if I want us to be face to face, one way I can just do is I can run around and face in front of them like that. In a real life conflict, what do you think that might represent?
I think it goes back to that chart you showed us, TK, when someone inspired us to change and when someone forced us to change. I see this more as someone trying to force change and to fix the situation.
Great. Yeah, we're trying to force someone else to change. And so it's the idea, if I can run around this conflict and get in front of them, then they're going to see my humanity. I'm going to force them to see my humanity. And then once they see my side, they agree with me, they figured it all out, then we're going to be able to have this open relationship because they understand me. And so it's this idea, just like you said, Morgan, of us trying to force someone to change in a way that helps us. But oh well, I guess that ruins it. But what do people normally do when we do that? You guys just saw it. I ruined it a little bit, but when we try to force people to change, what's their normal response to that?
They usually turn around or they turn your back to you.
Yeah, they're really resistant to that. And so in this model, we can just think they're just going to turn around and look away from us again, and we're going to be right back to square one. And so if we're taking this easy love approach, what are we focused on?
Ourselves and our needs.
Perfect. We're focused on ourselves and our needs. We're still stuck in this rut of self-preservation that we've been talking about almost every time we're here. And so why does this easy love approach not work?
Because it takes very little effort, and people can tell when you're not putting an effort to care about them.
Yeah, it takes little effort on our part. We're kind of actually trying to push all the effort onto the other person to see our humanity. It goes right back to the closed versus open list that we made. We're actually engaging in all the stuff just on the closed side and ignoring all the stuff on the open side, hoping that it'll work, even though we know for ourselves it doesn't work. So that's the first easy love approach. Does anybody have questions about that or any other thoughts on that? Or questions about anything we've talked about so far before we move on? Okay, so now we're going to go to the second easy love approach. This is another way we could think about as a strategy, if you will, that we might have of how do we move from closed to open. And so to explain this, I'm actually going to tell a story from my life. And so this happened to me a couple years ago. I was living in England at the time, and I was there as a volunteer for an organization. And something unique about this organization is they always had us doing our work, which was primarily community work. Was we would do our work always in groups, and so we always would be paired with at least one other person, sometimes more. But we always kind of had to do all our work with those people. It was mostly a liability issue, making sure that we were safe because a lot of us were not from that country. And the person that I was paired with at this time, we'll call him Eli. He was someone that I had a lot of conflict with. He's someone who I had a lot of disagreements with. He often had a lot of trouble actually going out and doing our work. Our work was really physically demanding because we were kind of outdoors all day, constantly doing work regardless of the weather. And so it was pretty physically demanding. We had to wake up early with a pretty strict schedule. And he, in my mind, especially at the time, just didn't want to do it. He just wanted to sleep in all the time. He told me he was really sick. And so he didn't really have the energy to kind of get up and do this work. And so we got in a lot of arguments where I think we could do something that'd be really helpful for our work. And he would think, he didn't want to do it. And so we get in all these big arguments, and I was really stuck in this destructive conflict, this conflict tornado with him. And we were very much both closed off to each other. So one day, we got a call from our organization. They told us, they told Eli rather, that the sickness that he'd been saying he's been having has been going on for a long time. It actually had been going on for months, even before we'd started working together. And so they told him that he needed to go see a doctor and get it checked out. So we go to the doctor. The doctor takes some blood samples, run some tests, and they tell us, it's going to take a little while for the results to come in, so we can go out and they'll call us again whenever they find anything conclusive. So we leave and we go back and we start just doing some more work. And we were actually out pretty late that night working. I remember it was the middle of winter, it was January. So it was freezing outside. It was pitch black. We were out walking in this neighborhood, and we finally get a phone call, and Eli picks up the phone and starts talking to the doctor who'd finally called. And in my mind at the time, I'm thinking, this is going to be a really short phone call. Like, the doctor's just going to tell him, nothing's wrong. He just needs to suck it up, and we're going to be able to go back on our work. But that doesn't happen. As time goes on, he just keeps talking to the doctor, and the phone call keeps getting longer and longer, and they just keep talking, and I'm getting really concerned. I can see Eli's face just kind of get more and more somber. I can see some tears starting to show up in his eyes, and finally he hangs up the phone. And I look at Eli, and I'm like, Eli, like, what did the doctor tell you? Like, what's going on? And he really seriously tells me that the doctor found that he has a really rare genetic blood disease that's been causing him to actually feel this fatigue, have some other symptoms, that, you know, he's had like these nausea attacks and kind of vomiting attacks, and he's it's a permanent disease. There's no treatment for it. There's no way to cure it. It's just something he's going to have to live with for the rest of his life. And it's actually really serious. And he told me a little bit more about it. It actually can be life threatening. But anyway, in that moment where he told me that what was going on and what he had, it was like this wave of humanity washed over me, and all this frustration, all this anger I held for him disappeared, and I was able to see him as a person, and I felt like I understood him, and we started having an open relationship. And so that's the story, and this is an easy love approach, and the first thing I want you guys to think about, we're going to dive a little bit more into this example. But what about this story? What about my relationship with Eli? What about this approach was easy?
They humanize themselves for you.
Great. Yeah, they humanize themselves for me. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that? Like,
well, beforehand, you weren't really trying to find out what was actually happening. Instead, you just kept fighting each other when he might have not really been knowing what's going on himself. And in that way, he wouldn't really have cared until you found out something was wrong with him and that he wasn't lying.
Great. Yeah, and so I didn't have to do any work. I could persist and do whatever I wanted, and continue to see him as an object and have this conflict with him. And I was really just, I was waiting for his humanity to be proven or disproven in a way you could think. And so because that's an easy love approach and because it's so easy, there are some potential downsides to us relying on this approach. You could say, if we were like, you know, I really want to move from close to open in my relationship, this is the way I'm going to do it. There's going to be some downsides. What do you think some of those might be?
I think it creates a habit when we're in conflict that we need something like a proof or evidence that these are ways that we can see someone's humanity. Like in your case, you know, it changed for you because you had evidence and proof, like, hey, this person is a human because he has this condition that I feel for. But in the end, it's not really necessarily resolving the conflict or going over the things that are bothering both of you or denying both your needs and wants. It's just kind of showing you, hey, like, this is something we can all connect to and relate to.
Definitely. Great. What other thoughts do you have about potential downsides of this way? Okay, well, you covered most of them, Morgan, so we'll just go with that. So yeah, just like we were talking about, this is out of our control. We're taking a very passive approach to resolving our conflicts because we're just basically saying, I'm going to wait till some exterior force, some exterior story causes me to see them as a person. And so rather than us turning or trying to force someone else to turn, we're kind of waiting to be turned by some exterior force. Likewise, it's really long lasting. And Morgan kind of talked about this. We're not actually dealing with the root problems of our conflict. You know, there's just some exterior force that's happening that's making us see each other as people, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to stay that way. Those kind of open relationships can quickly degrade back into a closed one because we didn't really address the problems. And then lastly, it reinforces this idea that I cannot change until the conditions around me change. And I think Morgan said this, you know, it creates a bad habit about how we deal with this. So those two easy love approaches can lead us to what we call the tried and untrue methods. And these are just behaviors we might engage in when we approach moving from closed to open with one of those two easy love approaches. So the first one is forcing. We've talked a lot about this. Obviously, forcing doesn't work, and I think we've covered that pretty extensively. Let's talk about the next one, which is coping. So I could maybe try to think, okay, I'm in this conflict. the way we're going to move from closed to open is I'm just going to deal with whatever it is that they're doing that's annoying me. Why do you think that may not work? This kind of goes back to when we talked about accommodating, I think a few weeks ago. Why does coping not help us resolve the conflict?
We're just justifying what we're already doing, kind of.
Yeah, we can just justify what we're doing and we can kind of ignore the conflict. Great. Any other thoughts about that?
Honestly, we're not really solving the problem. We're kind of just like putting it off.
Yeah, we're just not solving it. We're just putting it off. And eventually what can happen when we try to cope with it, just like we talked about with accommodation, is resentment can build up and eventually kind of blow up the conflict in our face. And so, but if we're approaching this from an easy love approach, especially if we're doing the second one, we might just be like, I'm just going to cope with it until something else happens. But that is not going to really help us. Another one that we might often think is leaving. I'm just going to leave this relationship or this conflict and not deal with it anymore. But why does that not help us in changing the way that we're seeing someone or resolving the conflict in that way?
It allows the conflict to linger. It leaves you with a lot of questions like, what if I had changed this, or what if, we had fixed the relationship, or what would happen if I continue to let the conflict go? And so it kind of just allows you to really resent the person.
Great. And so it leaves a lot of resentment because we don't actually change how we're seeing people. We're just taking our problem and compartmentalizing it and then going somewhere else. And we can think about this if we go back to our conflict styles again. We can think about avoiding, like we're just avoiding the conflict. We're just trying to leave its presence. Last one can be more communication. Now, this is one that a lot of times in conflict, I feel like it's kind of the common knowledge approach. You just need to communicate more, and that's going to be able to help you resolve the conflict. But why do you think this may not work? If we're in a closed relationship, we're back to back helping each other. Why is more communication maybe not the answer by itself, at least?
I feel like sometimes it can just perpetuate the same issues because they're saying the same things over and over again. There's not time to think of a different way to approach it.
That's perfect. Just like we talked about when we had our closed list, one of the things we talked about is people won't listen when we're close to each other. They feel like they already know what the other person is thinking or doing. And so they just will talk. They'll talk about their side, but they won't actually listen to the other side. And so people are close to each other. They're just repeating the same things that they've always been repeating. And it actually can just escalate the conflict even more. And so all of these methods of thinking we maybe think might work if we're taking an approach of easy love, but don't necessarily actually help us resolve the conflict. And so that brings us to the dangerous love approach. Now, in the dangerous love approach, we first off recognize that there's a crucial step that's missing from this diagram of closed to open. And that's this, that in between us being able to move from both of us being closed to both of us being open, I need to turn first. I need to be able to see their humanity. I need to be able to make that effort to begin with. And we call this the most dangerous move. Now, just hearing that, looking at that, why do you think we use that word dangerous to describe it? What about it feels dangerous, maybe?
I think sorry.
No.
Okay. So I think one way that it could be dangerous is that it leaves us vulnerable. And I think that's one thing that I feel like in conflict is kind of scary, is that you're leaving yourself quite vulnerable. But at the same time, the other person is also vulnerable too. So you're both kind of in a vulnerable state, and you are sometimes certain or uncertain about what will happen next.
Great. So there's a sense of vulnerability. Great. Isabel, did you want to say something as well? No? That cover it?
That's basically it. Yeah.
Stole your answer? Well, we can resolve that conflict later. Okay, great. So there's a sense of vulnerability that we have. And we talked about this when we talked about overcoming our fear of people a lot. That one of the fears that we have that's really deep-seated is this fear that people aren't going to reciprocate our efforts, that we're going to put in forth all this effort to see them as a person, try to collaborate with them, but they're going to reject it. And that can feel dangerous. But making this move is the most critical step in us being able to have that open relationship. And there's a couple ways we can think about this and a couple ways that help us understand what it really entails. So first off, we can think about, if we were to go back to, just here, where there's just those two steps, we're both closed or we're both open. What do you think the chances really are of that kind of both people being close to each other? What are the chances of that relationship really being able to move to both people being open? You can think about it, especially if you came last week with our conflict tornado, like when we're engaged in a really escalated destructive conflict, what are the real chances if nothing else changes that we're just going to one day decide, you know what, like we're both going to see each other as people?
I think it takes time. I had a conflict with one of my friends a couple years ago, and it escalated and it continued to escalate. And one day I think we finally said, hey, sorry that I did this, but apologizing wasn't enough.
Mm.
And there were definitely still some deep feelings that were felt, and we had to work on it more. But sometimes, like I said, it's just sometimes saying sorry isn't enough at first.
So that's a great example, especially of decollusion that we talked about last time. Like sometimes it takes this prolonged effort to bring it back down to where it was before. But we can also think about, so like, if we're just both turned away from each other, it's going to be difficult for us to both decide, one day like, oh, everything's great, we're now open to each other. But what if we make that dangerous move? What if we turn first and start really trying to see them as a person, understand their point of view? Do you think our chances go up or down of us being able to have an open relationship if we do that? Up. Well, I saw people give a thumbs up. I'm assuming that's what it is. Maybe good is what that means. Great. So our chances probably go up. Maybe we don't think they go up that much. Maybe we were like, yeah, now there's only a 13% chance. But, before there was really not much of a chance at all of us being able to move to that kind of relationship, whereas now there is. And so it's always an improvement. Now, another thing to understand about the most dangerous move is that a lot of times we can come into conflict and think about, what I really want out of this conflict is that I want the other person to change some sort of behavior. We've talked a lot about that. I want them to stop or start doing something. And so we can look at dangerous love and the most dangerous move as just an elaborate strategy to be able to achieve that. And so, I am going to turn first. I am going to try to see them as a person, but I'm really only doing it because I want them to finally change in the end. But if we approach the most dangerous move from that perspective, who are we really still focused on?
Ourselves.
Ourselves. Thank you, Isabel. We're still focused on ourselves. And so there's still this inward mindset that we're experiencing. We're only doing this to try to get them to change. And so part of understanding the most dangerous move is we need to understand that we need to let go of this fear that the other person isn't going to reciprocate. We need to let go of us basing our decisions in this at all upon what the other person is going to do in response. Because if we can change, if we can see them as a person, if we can stop the cycle of destructive conflict that we're doing, then the conflict in its destructive sense ends, because we've decided to quit participating in it, at least in that fashion. And it doesn't end up mattering what the other person decides to do, because the conflict, the destructive conflict, can end right there. And that's an important thing to understand about the most dangerous move. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about today is just to help us better understand a little bit more about this, and we'll try to go through this quickly. We're almost out of time today. But we call it the kumbaya fallacies. So dangerous love, a lot of times people think of the word love as this really soft and mushy kind of thing. And, you know, we've talked a little bit about this idea. And the kumbaya, those of you who are familiar with what kumbaya is, it's kind of a song that, at least in American culture, connotates like these hippies all kind of standing around a campfire singing the song. And the idea is, you know, like, oh, if we could all just stand around this campfire and sing this song kumbaya and be nice to each other, you know, all the conflict in the world would go away. And at least in the 60s and forward, that kind of idea of peace was really tainted by that really soft, kind of passive approach. And people thought, you know, peace isn't really equipped to deal with the harsh realities that we often experience when we're in conflict. And so the kumbaya fallacies are some things that we might think that help us be skeptical, or maybe not help, but cause us to be skeptical of this dangerous love process. The first one, we're going to say dangerous love is naive. And this goes back to the idea that, you know, we're engaged in these really soft behaviors. It's just the idea, you know, we just need to be really nice to each other. And somehow that's going to fix these really escalated, protracted conflicts that exist in our lives or around the world. But as we understand dangerous love a little bit better, we can understand what's really, what dangerous love really teaches us about this. So would someone want to read these two quotes for us? Someone want to volunteer for that?
I can do that, TK.
Thanks.
So the first one says, the love in dangerous love doesn't imply a particular behavior. Loving others dangerously frees us up to treat them in exactly the way we should treat them, as people. Sometimes people need to be corrected, even fired, but we'll never really know that until we see them as people.
Okay, so the dangerous love isn't prescribing a particular behavior. So we can do difficult things, correct, fire people. We can have difficult conversations. We can have boundaries with people. We can tell them that, you know, there's something in their lives that we need them to actually change, but we can see them as a person while we do that. And so what that teaches us about making the most dangerous move is there's no one behavior, there's no one thing to do to make it. For each of us, as we strive to see the other person as a person in that conflict, we're going to know, we're going to have a sense of what we really need to do in order to actually make that move and actually turn first. And those things could be difficult, those difficult things. But we're only going to know what it is, like it said in that quote, when we see people as people. So that's the first one. And then the reality is dangerous love is strong. So second fallacy is that dangerous love is passive. This could be the idea, you know, and this might be an easy one to think because we've talked so much about it, that this idea of seeing people as people is all we need to do in order to change conflict. That if I just work on my inner image of others, my inner self, if I just change how I see the world and do nothing else, then that's going to be dangerous love. That's going to cause the conflict to change. But dangerous love actually has this. Would someone want to read these for us?
I can read it.
Thank you.
It's not enough to say that we see people as people. Our actions have to reflect that view for it to have any real power. An apology without change isn't an apology. Accountability without correction isn't accountability. Dangerous love without action isn't really dangerous or love.
Dangerous love without action isn't really dangerous or love. And so there's two things you could look at this. I mean, on one hand, we could say, you know, we're not really actually seeing them as a person unless we are willing to take that action. But ultimately, when we're trying to make that most dangerous move, and that's what, you know, the answer to this next question is that we do need to do something for the most part. There will be some times that maybe our sense as we've analyzed the situation. I know Professor Ford has a story he shares about this, where his real sense that he had at the end of the conflict was that he needed to give that person space and leave them alone. And so sometimes that might be our real sense, but most of the time, I mean, even that is really an action, but most of the time we're going to have a specific idea of what we really can do to help that person. And so the reality of it is dangerous love is active. And so when we think about the dangerous love overall, from everything we've talked about today, the most dangerous move is about actively making the choice to be the first to turn towards those we're in conflict with. It's about helping those that we are in conflict with know that we see their and value their needs, fears, hopes, and humanity, and then taking action to support that change in view. And so my invitation to you, this is the homework for this. Again, you don't have to like turn this in or anything, but the invitation is to think about someone you've been in conflict with and make that effort to turn first towards them. That's it for today. Does anyone have any questions for me before we end? No? Okay, great. Thank you for coming. That was a little bit longer one. Thank you for staying, guys. Thanks for participating. You guys are free to go. I'll see you next week.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank
Bye.